Ani bujo Myeengun Henry deshkanzibi and onjiba Myeengun. I'm so happy to be back with you today. We have a special guest, but before we go into our conversation, I wanted to let you know that I attended the AFN General Assembly last week in Ottawa, and I always try to bring you up to date with some current events that are happening within the Indigenous community. Nish Vibes is really an open show. It talks about our social life as Indigenous people, but it also talks about current events that are affecting First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people across Turtle Island. And being up in Ottawa, where I served as chief and I was able to speak many times, but as a kind of an observer this time, it kind of made me feel like, the experience that I have and what I've come to know, sometimes I can add value to the conversations that they have. So a lot of the chiefs have recognized my ability to share some knowledge, and I get a chance to speak with various chiefs across Canada, and sometimes we'll deliberate a little bit before they actually do their speeches, and it's really nice to feel that there's a relationship with the community. AFN really doesn't have a real close relationship to members. It's a chiefs committee, and the chiefs are the ones who speak mostly, but we're trying to make some changes to AFN where we can actually have more in dialogue, with community members. And some of the tough dialogues that we have affect First Nations across Canada, like policing in First Nation communities, our history with various issues that we face. And most recently was the MOU signed with Alberta with the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister was there, so we got a chance to speak with him directly and show our concerns about the relationship in our treaty relationship that we have with Canada. When we think about the history of Canada, it was formed on relationship with First Nations. And we entered into a era of treaty making. Even previous to that, our wampum belts told the story about how the relationship would be. And so this is what I bring to the FN when I go. I carry my wampum belts, and I do traditional teachings with them, and I do sunrise ceremony with them. So it's a real balance of today's political world into our traditions and our relationship as the settlers came to this part of the world. And so the effects of AFN is a little bit, I guess, in muddy water today. People look at it as a place where an organization is making decisions on First Nations, but it really wasn't meant to be a decision maker. It was meant to deliberate with First Nations and to build maybe consensus on issues that we have to have with the government of Canada. And so take, for instance, the MOU that Alberta has made with the Prime Minister about pipelines, which became a very hot topic up in AFN this term. And we found out that, it's not wanted, but some communities do want it. So it's really tough for Indigenous leadership to, find that path of what the non-Native people consider reconciliation, how governments look at that, and how we're going to be able to interact with each other on crucial issues. But we did hear from the Prime Minister, who said that he will put together a premiers meeting with the chiefs early in the year. And so it kind of helps us at least send our messages to the provinces of Canada, especially here in Ontario, where the Ring of Fire has been a subject of controversy, where First Nations now are making relationships with governments to extract resources. And in one of my deliberations with the chiefs was that the agreements that we're making today in Ontario are agreements that were made a long time ago, that those promises that we're hearing today should have been fulfilled before. And so if we make a new agreement with the government of Ontario, those are just agreements that were unfulfilled in the past. And so now if we give up our resources, it's now that we're giving up more than what we even agreed to a long time ago in our original treaties. So you have to think about that, at least for First Nations. You might want to get out of poverty. You might want to find prosperity in your communities. But in giving up what you were already owed really isn't a benefit in a long way. We just have to explore the government to honor our original treaties, and then we wouldn't have the problems that we do face in First Nation communities. So I really enjoy these conversations at AFN because there's really good deliberation on these, and we get a chance to meet all the MPs and make relationships to make things better for our communities. So that's where I sit with this role that I carry as I walk through these passageways with government officials and our First Nation communities together. So today we're at the University of Waterloo, where we have tremendous people. This university, as I have been able to meet through Nish Vibes, is helping me understand the role that people play here. What not just in a professional area, but in a personal area. How they bring their energy and their history to a university to make this a place of better learning for all. And we've gone on this new road just a few years ago when Canada brought out their calls to action. It kind of got the University of Waterloo thinking about what are we doing with First Nation, Métis and Inuit people here? Are we fulfilling some of those roles? What it is that we need to do to start challenging ourselves to look at the population of Indigenous people and where we can support and to help that population, succeed in this country, professionally. So out came ideas. At times, those ideas were a little tough to understand, but today we have the Office of Indigenous Relations, which has been a part of this process of reconciliation. And today, I'm honored to bring you a gentleman who I got to know recently, and he's now going into the leadership role of OIR, is what we call it. And he'll be looking after that department and helping this university grow at the governance level all the way through. So I want to introduce you to Mr. John Lewis here, who's here to visit with us this hour. And we're going to have a little conversation about who he is, what he does, and wherever the conversation goes. But before I do, I want to give you... Oh, sorry about that. I want to give you a tobacco tie.
Yes.
Sorry about that. The tobacco tie. In our tradition, you don't ask people to do or share unless they want to do that. And tobacco is really that kind of a gesture to say, I hope that you're willing to share what you feel like today. I don't feel pressured to say things you don't want to say, but say what you want to say in the way that you want to say it. Mm. So that's what Nish Vibes is about today. So welcome, John.
Thank you, Myeengun.
Yeah, well, let's start here. Like, who is John Lewis, and
oh boy,
and where do you come from? And I know, help us out, understand who you are.
I'm still trying to figure that out, Myeengun. I'm almost 60 and I'm still trying to get to know who I am. I'm John Lewis. I've been at Waterloo for about 20 years, but my career here doesn't really define me. My family comes from Temiskaming First Nation on my father's side, and so my dad was born in Temiskaming, and my mother is a settler. Her background is English and Scandinavian, and their story was that she grew up in Southern Ontario. She was a farmer's daughter, and then went to a trade school, became a office administrator. Back then they used to call them secretaries, and she got her first job working at CFB Borden, which is where she met my father, who was a veteran. He was a veteran of 2 wars. And the two of them, found each other, got married, and had myself and my brother and sister. And so I grew up in many places. And so I grew up in Toronto, spent a great deal of time in Iron Bridge, Blind River area, growing up. And then I also lived in Kingston and Vancouver, British Columbia, which is where I had my children. And then since moved back here, and now I've been at Waterloo for about the last 20 years. And so the other aspects of, if you wanted to get to know John Lewis, education, I'm a community planner. So that's one of my sort of fields of training. Where my heart really lies, though, is in forestry. And so I have 2 degrees in forestry from the University of British Columbia, and did a great deal of work when I was a grad student out there, working with many First Nations across the province. So worked with the Stalo, I worked with the Shuswap, worked with the Gitxsan, the Niska, worked with Treaty 8 Tribal Council. I mean, the list goes on. So I did a lot of work with First Nations communities out west. And since coming here, that's been sort of my aspiration, is to, carry on the good work for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, at the University of Waterloo. And I got to say, and this is just sort of one little anecdote that I sometimes like sharing, is that when I came here in 2005, and I remember saying to, the department at the time, it's like, well, I'm Indigenous. I've done lots of Indigenous research, and I'm coming into the School of Planning, and I want to do some Indigenous work for, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities. And so the answer I got back in 2005, and this is like well before TRC, was, well, you're at a Southern Ontario university, and we're an urban university. None of that really applies here. So, for the sake of your career, we would suggest that you sort of find other pursuits, just so you can get tenure and be successful in that path. So I partially listened to that advice, and then managed to get tenure in 2010, and then chose to slowly come back to what really interested me. And so what really basically, got me on fire. So after TRC came out, there was a little bit of a lag in terms of the university's response to the calls to action. But the president at the time said, we would like to have, a group of people get together and talk about how we can respond. And so I sat on one of the roundtables at the time, and this is before Jean Becker, came to the university. And we started looking at ways that, we could respond to those calls to action. And that's been sort of the area that I've really wanted to work in ever since. It's just, how can the university be more effective, in responding to, reconciliation.
Mm-hmm. What do you think got them thinking that way? I know you have had some influence on that. Was it tough to get your influence, them to consider, researching and looking more into Indigenous ways?
It was tough, I guess, prior to 2015. Mm-hmm. And even after 2015, there was still a little bit of reluctance to, take it on. Mm-hmm. And I think that the university felt like, well, their counterparts in the U15, we're taking the initiative and doing taking some first steps, really constructive first steps. And I think the university felt like it needed to catch up, more or less. And then, as part of that, there was a response to bring in more people that could do, Indigenous-focused research. And that's when, I guess, the appetite for doing the kind of research, the kind of teaching that I've wanted to do, and this kind of service, like working for the Indigenous community members on this campus. That's where it became something that the university was like, yeah, this is a direction we need to go in. And it really helped in recent years, as you know, to have people at the very top, senior leadership, the president, the provost, who are very supportive of this kind of work.
Absolutely. They set the tone, and so what I did in my previous work was we had the opposite. We had the staff and faculty all interested in, working with First Nations, but the leadership didn't. And so you kind of in this gray area of how much you can advance or what your boundaries are. So that kind of opened the door for this university to, set that tone so that we can actually start working together, throughout the university to, fulfill some of those TRC recommendations for sure. That's good. I think about it now. We're still behind a lot of universities. I think there's still a lot of work for us to do. we did set the tone, and you did mention when Jean came here, that opened a lot of doors up for us to advance a little bit. But, more than that, I think it's our community who knows Canada didn't do right by First Nations or educate people very well. And now that's, I think, a want that I notice in our students today when they're hearing about First Nation history. How come it's never been, brought to their attention? And their parents are always saying, well, I didn't learn it, so I couldn't tell you anything.
Yeah. And
us being a university that's not particularly close to a First Nation kind of felt a little bit like there's no First Nations here, so, why do I need to do that as compared to some first universities that are, in the community?
Yeah, UBC, being an alum of UBC, which is where I did my forestry degrees, it was really fortunate to be there, even in the mid to late 90s. For students now, that just feels like ancient history, but, for me, it was like yesterday. But, being an Indigenous student at that university at the time, the Faculty of Forestry had its own advisor, and there was also the First Nations House of Learning, still there, still very active. The Huihui Library, Indigenous-focused library space. And UBC had, of course, it's on Musqueam land. And so it has this really close relationship, with the Musqueam community. And that was a supportive environment, a really great environment to be a student at the time. And then I come to Waterloo, and it was like, where is all of this really important and necessary, supports, for research, teaching, and just for being a member of the community. And so, I think, as you said, there's still a great deal of catch up. Other institutions are way ahead of us, in terms of providing those supports to our community. And I think that, when you think forward, for the next couple of years, while I'm in the AVP role, that is my aspiration, is to try and do that hard work of catching up, but doing it not too quickly, but doing it properly.
I kind of, I like that style because I was very good friends with, over at Mercady. I'm still good friends with them. Like we talk quite regularly, and Elijah Harper was also a good friend of mine, and I carry them on my wall here. Some of my inspirers, but they both had different personalities and way about going thing. Elijah was a real passionate, calm, gentleman, who got his voice across in a different way. And Ovid was a slam the table kind of guy. Listen to me. I kind of try to set myself in the middle now, because an aggressive approach kind of sets everything back a little bit, and a too passive approach, makes it linger too long. So it kind of gives you a little chance to see. And it's who you're working with too. If your presidents and leadership at your university is kind of engaged, then it becomes a lot easier to work with.
Yeah.
So I think we got lucky, especially with our current president, who came here with a vision from Toronto, that this has to happen. So I think everything landed like at a good time, and the right personalities came at the right time. And now that we get the foundation here, now it's in your hands, I know, because you're taking over that part of it, is to advance it a little bit further now. Yeah. So I think that's what I see, happening here. What's your challenges with that, though? Still, are you still?
Well, I think the challenges that need to be overcome, are having just sort of clarity in terms of what the vision is, and being able to. We have the strategic plan. We've had that for a few years now, and then being able to work with our counterparts across the institution to be able to say, here's what we really want to action on for the next few years, and just say, here's some of the priority things that we would like to do for the next 2 to 5 years. And then here are the people that we want to be able to be partnered with, over that period of time. And so I think, the one thing I like to do is just try to make sure, and, my management style years ago, if you'd asked me back then, I would have been the bang the table kind of guy, basically saying we need to do this and do it now. And I guess maybe it's in a bit of an older age, where I've come to the realization that no, you need to be a bit more diplomatic, and you need to basically choose sometimes when it's right to fight, or when, to pick battles, and when it's time to just sit and dialogue. And so part of my style and the approach that I would like to take is be able to say, okay, here's my vision, and I'm going to lay it out, and I'm going to make very clear about it, about what our expectations are and what the university's expectations, and then try to find that middle ground, that common ground. And so I believe, very much in dialogue, in having conversation, in clarity, making sure expectations are out there and on the table, and then we can all basically move forward and make progress together.
I think that's good. What we talk about in our Indigenous circles is consultation a lot. And sometimes we don't do that enough with our own people. We do our research and we see what other institutions are doing. But our younger generation are a lot more knowledgeable now. They've been through these things and they have a voice. Just kind of a side note, when I was up at AFN, we were getting ready to speak with the Prime Minister who was coming. And everybody was talking about treaties and pipelines, really important things. And I stood up and I said, there's one more important thing that I think we need to talk about. It's a current leader who is showing total disrespect for women, blatantly calling them, terrible names, in public. I said, if we just stand and let him do that, he just doesn't feel that there's no opposition to what he says. I said, how does the leadership in Canada, our chiefs, feel about people doing things like that, especially when we've been through murdered and missing women, and our history of women being victimized. And in fact, that day we were searching another landfill site in Vancouver for another Indigenous woman. So the point is, consultation with our community. If the leaders make decisions, they have to engage with the reality of our people, and I think same thing with everything in life that we do. If we get a chance to speak with our grandmas, who have so much vision, our students, even at elementary age, they can help us understand things. And then we can formulate those scenarios that I think will be really a lot more impressive to, society in general, because we've been able to do that. So that, I always think about that in a leadership role, where we get our ideas from, how we find them. But, we have answers to almost every problem that we have. In fact, we've been, through our treaties that we've made, if we honored them, there would be no poverty today, not in the Indigenous world or non-Indigenous world, because we would have shared those resources regularly with people and everybody would have what they need. Crime wouldn't be the same. Our health issues wouldn't be the same. So I think, it takes time to put this in your head. When you get 60s and you've got all this history, it formulates a better opinion for you because you get to that certain age and now you can put it all together. So I think, does that kind of play into your leadership role?
Consultation's always been sort of a troubling word for me, just because of the baggage I brought from BC. Every time I mentioned when I was working with First Nations out there, and we would talk about consultation, it was always like, great, so we get a company or the BC Ministry of Forests coming and talking to us and saying, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have a conversation with you, and then we're going to take it away, and we're going to do whatever we wanted to do anyway. So it always was very sort of a top-down, and the communities out there were saying to me, well, we would rather have some kind of engagement. We want to be part of the decision-making. And that is kind of the mindset, that I'm bringing to my role, is like, yeah, consultation is important, and it's important to have those conversations daily. And what I'm doing right now is I could very well come up with sort of a strategy or an action plan, for the next couple of years and say, here it is. And then I hope everybody will sort of follow along with it. But what I want to do is be able to spend, the first 4 months of my time in the AVP role is having those conversations and engaging, members of our community and being able to say, this is what I envision, what's your vision for this as well? Where do you see yourself having an active role in this? Is there anything you want to add to this? Change it. So I feel like, everybody within OIR, outside OIR, who is Indigenous at the University of Waterloo, needs to know about this, understand it, and have something to say about it. So that when we unfold, and move our action plan forward, our strat plan, people can say that they've had a stake in it, they've had a voice. And again, clarity is important for me. And so I think it's important that everybody understand sort of what we're thinking, and I understand in turn what other people are thinking about the path forward.
We do sit in a little unique situation here because of the strength of the indigenous home nations that are here. Mm-hmm. We're sitting in a southern Ontario region, where Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee people, have their history and battles and challenges, and still today, government likes to throw wedges where they can so that it continues to be, not so easy to work with. So I think, we have challenges in that manner. It's not our own fault. I think, if we look at our history, we have, I have belts here, friendship belts, and I have dish with one spoon belts and other ones that, helped us deal with our differences. But government seems to always want to make sure that battle continues so that you don't have clarity and consensus on many things. So I think in a role that, you're in, you kind of get caught in that because it shouldn't be there. I know that, but the government really likes to make sure that it continues. And that's a challenge that we still face in this region. Maybe if you're in Alberta, where you have Cree people, you're going to have your internal battles, but it's mostly one vision that they've always had. Here we got like two and maybe even three, so that's always a challenge. And I think we can work through it. It's just a matter of us recognizing our respect of all that history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it will be a challenge. It's always going to be. And, part of what I've, come to realize, over many years is that, the government will do whatever it can to drive that wedge, to try and keep basically this, I'm going to say oppositional or adversarial relationship, not only between government and First Nations, but among First Nations or between First Nations, keep it, make it persist. So, it's easier to deal with, another community, if they're fractured rather than, unified basically and working from the same playbook. So
the original First Nations in this region, when I was chief, we rekindled the treaty alignment that we had in the southern region. We were the original treaty signers in southern Ontario with the pre-Confederacy treaties that we have. And they disbanded maybe about 100 and something years ago. They didn't like us meeting and having meetings, so we decided to build new wampum strings, and we gave them out to the 5 First Nations in the southern region that were the treaty signers of these ones in this region. And we started meeting again. And one day we were solving a land claim on my First Nations, and the Minister of Indian Affairs comes down, and he's all happy because we've solved this land claim. We happened to have a treaty meeting that day, and we brought him in. I said, "This is what we're doing now. We've rebinded our treaty partnership," and I've never seen anybody so offended before. He came in. He was nervous. His mouth was shaking, because he didn't want to see us, rekindle these treaties and start building relationships again. So. It's even today, we're still challenged by those types of things. And I think with what we can do right now, they're putting a wedge between the Métis, here in Ontario, like quite strong. And you're aware of that. And it's a really mean battle, that's taking place.
It is a mean battle. And I have many perspectives basically on the conflict with, the Métis Nation of Ontario. And it's up to the Métis, to try and figure out basically their own sort of definitions of identity and, what it means to be a citizen, of the Métis homeland. So, notwithstanding that, my understanding is, and I guess the approach I'll be taking is, when Métis citizens approach us, whether they're MNO, MMF, MNS, MNA, we take it at face value. It's their right to determine who belongs to their nations, and far be it for me to basically wade into those, difficult waters, of fighting about. And again, this kind of violence, that is being, perpetrated, within the Métis Nation, but, from First Nations to the Métis, it's not helpful.
Not at all.
It's not helpful.
I think of us as an educator. What we have to be respectful of all, our Inuit population, our Métis, our First Nation people, that are here off and on reserve, status, non-status, all those different definitions that we have about ourselves. But I think the overall, if we're respectful of all those things, then what we deliver is an honest approach to, their careers and the history that we have. And I think that kind of wades us out of that political war, that we see that's engaged in right now, because we can fall into that pretty easy. It's so easy for us to join that battle. So even in my role, I do spiritual work in the community, and I don't even ask those questions. Like if there's something that I can do to help somebody and they walk away more fulfilled, more honest, then I think, at least we've done some good work.
And that is the key thing, right, is doing the good work. Stirring up conflict or becoming part of a conflict, not interested in that at all. It's really, bottom line is, particularly, in our role in OIR, is supporting, members of First Nations, Métis, Inuit communities, staying out of, those internal battles, and just really focusing on just, how do the people that are coming from those communities, when they come to the University of Waterloo, what are they looking for from the institution to help support them, in fulfilling their career and whatever life goals they have. I mean, that sounds like a really nebulous and very lofty statement to make. It's like somebody's out there probably saying, what a load of... But no, I actually do believe it, right? Yeah. I do firmly believe it.
But we get this knock on the head every now and then. We get the... Thomas King situations, and all. Somebody was Indigenous and all of a sudden found they're not, this pretendian issue that we're going through, in our communities right now. So it does make us think, like what we're delivering and who we're delivering to, because there is some people who, purposely want to take on a role as Indigenous, and maybe the benefits that they can think are there, is the reason, and that's a real issue that we're facing with today, and there's no clear answer. I know that, but
and it's a hard answer because as we and every other U15 institution in the country, other universities outside the U15 have implemented the identity verification guidelines. Let me back up: not identity, but citizenship membership verification. And it's a tough thing to try and sell, right? It's like on the one hand, we do need to do this sort of thing, to ensure that whoever is coming to the university and benefiting from Indigenous programs, that they are members of an Indigenous community. They're recognized by that community. In other words, that community is basically claiming them, not the other way around.
Yes.
But then we still run into those difficulties, where people basically say, well, it's really the institution, it's Waterloo that's basically determining whether or not these people have Indigenous identity. And it's trying to, overcome that perception. That's one of the other challenges that's going to, be something I have to address in the next couple of years, that, particularly when you look at our guidelines, it really clearly states, we're relying on the communities themselves to tell us, who belongs to those communities. So it's not at the Office of Indigenous Relations saying you either do or you don't have Indigenous identity, or you do or you don't have Indigenous citizenship. It's the community saying that we claim them. And then we're just basically taking that and then saying, fine, then you have the right to access these programs and opportunities. So it's trying to overcome and dispel that notion that, OIR, the University of Waterloo, is policing identity, and that's not the case. However, there are other things that we can do to make sure that those guidelines respond, they grow, they adapt, to, I guess, the reality and the needs of Indigenous communities.
Which kind of led to me a few years ago. I wrote some resolutions to the AFN and Chiefs of Ontario and the Anishinaabeg Nation, about pressuring the government to allow us to identify our own membership. And it's starting to take root now, because that was a conversation we had last week in Ottawa. That would take us away from the pretendian issue, any other issues that we face, because First Nations really should be the ones defining who their members are. And government doesn't want to let that go. They like that that parental relationship that they have with us. They think they need to make those decisions for us.
Yeah.
So now we're starting to stand up and we're saying, we talked about the second generation cutoff last week, which is another big issue in First Nations. They're defining our membership and who and how long it can be members. So I think we're starting to put it together now. And we're going to take a very strong approach to our own membership identification process. And that takes us at universities out of that equation.
Yep.
Because we can't be Indian Affairs and we can't say who's Indigenous and who's not, which it appears that we are when people think that way.
And you're right. Once it's a much clearer sense that it's not a status card, it's defining citizenship, membership, a status card that comes from a government, a settler government organization, that it's the community themselves, that have basically said that this person is a member of our community. Then it becomes much more transparent. Then it becomes less a case of it's some bureaucrat sitting in an office in the university making a decision.
Absolutely. I know it's a tough conversation, but we're having them.
Yeah.
So what else are you thinking about at the university in your role? Like, I know there's a lot of things, but you got any ideas that you want to share?
Well, yeah. There's lots of stuff that I'd really like to do. The Land of Knowledge is the one project that you and I share that I'm really hoping that gets off the ground, and I'm hoping that I don't have to retire before I see any progress on it.
Me too.
But it's really exciting to think about the fact that we're in these institutions which only a few decades ago were basically saying, well, you attend a university, then you can no longer be a First Nations person, right? We're going to enfranchise you, and now we're creating these spaces in these same settings, where you can have you're free to be First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and reclaim culture, and be in the presence of knowledge keepers and elders on the land. Such a rarity. When you think back to when I was an undergrad, and it was just such an impossible idea, right? And so now we have this really unique opportunity, and other institutions have done the same thing. But, Waterloo has this great opportunity to build something really magnificent, up on Columbia Lake, which we do need to rename. Yes. We do need to rename.
We will rename.
I still stumble over that word. And, for me, being able to, get the support that we need, the donors, the foundations, to be able to say, such an important and invaluable thing for the university to be doing. Let's provide the resources to help you make it a reality. So that's the one thing I'm going to be working on.
Just for our listeners, there is some land dedicated now, so we can start operating under an Indigenous perspective with sweat lodges and ceremonies, and eventually a school. So that's in the works right now. And thanks to John for all the work he's done to get that going.
Well, it's a team thing, right? So we're all working as a community, to help make this work. And then, there's a variety of other things I'd like to do. I'd like to look at the ways, if you look at faculty, I'd like to look at how Indigenous faculty in particular, are being evaluated, for their work. And so when you're doing Indigenous-focused, with community, it's a very different enterprise. it takes much longer. Impact is measured in very different ways than just publishing, and how many grants you pulled in. It's actually, are you making a difference in the lives of the people that live in community? And so the extent to which and how that's dealt with in the tenure and promotion process is something I'd like to really look at and seriously address. Other institutions, again, have started to look at this, and Waterloo is kind of catching up. And then I'd also like to look at sort of, governance, and just sort of how, we as a community basically have our own voice, and we do have, councils, and we have committees of our own. But then how do they fit within the formal governance structure of the institution, so that we're not just letting settler voices decide important Indigenous matters, that, we get to advise, for instance, the Senate and the Board of Governors, and provide that direct line of communication. So governance for me is important. It's that one level of sort of reconciliation and decolonization that we've started to work towards, but now's, I think, the time where we can start making some real inroads.
Oh, absolutely. One other thing that was really impressive is we're working with First Nations now. We got an MOU with Deshkan right now, and it's kind of like new water for us, like how we go right into a First Nation and look at the issues that they deal with and how we can actually support.
Yeah, that background, I mean, that's a really important relationship. And that's the one instance where, as I'm talking about impactful work, that's the kind of thing I'm thinking about. So this is a situation where, Deshkan has, really important, pressing challenges that they would like the expertise at the university to address. So historically, it's always been a case of settler researchers got this great idea. I'm going to write a research grant, get money, and then go find a community that, will support my work. Usually the researcher basically gets all the benefits of that relationship. Mm-hmm. They have the relationship, they publish, helps them get tenure and promotion. Community may or may not get anything out of it. I'm trying to, we've crafted the MOU. We've got the Indigenous Future Circle, which is a funded body basically the monies have come from the Global Futures Initiative to help support changing the research culture at the University of Waterloo. So it's not outward directed. We don't have researchers going to communities, literally just knocking on the door saying, I got a great idea and I need you to work with me. But it's communities coming to the university and just changing that dynamic. So the community basically says, these are our needs. This is what we could use some support with. And then our office, the Office of Indigenous Relations, says, now we can go out and we can start tapping, some of the expertise in the institution and get them to help out. So it really changes the power dynamic, mm-hmm. Between communities and researchers, because, as I say, conventionally, it all rested with the researcher. They get the benefits. They walk away.
Yes.
And then the community's just kind of going, what the heck? What did we get out of this? And the other aspect of this is, and I used to get tired of doing this when I'd be on SHRC review committees for grant applications. Once the project is over, the researcher sometimes is gone. Even if that is the case, in the future, OIR is always there. We will always have those relationships with those communities. So we're meant to be there to be that sort of ongoing long-term presence, relationship with the community.
I think when we look at the statistics of livelihoods in First Nations, like that's where the priority, really has to exist. I mean, it's nice that we bring international students in, and that's been a challenge, I know, financially, for all institutions, but our home body, our First Nation communities who's been left out, historically, from educational institutes like this. There's various reasons for that, and I understand, like our kids don't graduate at regular levels, and I think we got to dig a little deeper into the homes, and I think that's what the MOU can do. We can see the challenges of one First Nation, because they're going to be similar in a lot of why they're not graduating, what their level of education is, so they can compete, rather than have them come here and fail, which is probably more, I guess, hurtful than, opening up doors for people, for them to fail is probably a terrible thing for people to do. So we have to make sure that they are qualified and able, because to set them up for failure is probably what happened in the past. So that's what we need to think about, I think, here at the university.
And it is a very important question. And I think, universities do a lot of proactive work, when it comes to recruitment. So they're out there, they've got the literature, they're perhaps meeting with students and youth and communities. But once the students, come into the university, it's the retention question, that becomes a real issue. Is just how do you support those students, so that they're successful, so that they're able to feel like they have a home at the University of Waterloo. And if they are struggling and on the threshold of dropping out and perhaps moving on, how do we support that student, and how do we encourage them to, stay the course and, try to get through their degrees. And then the other aspect is, particularly when it comes to recruitment, we have a number of Indigenous people, and we've run into some difficulties in the recent past, who are mature, and they've decided perhaps maybe a few years after, several years after graduating high school that, hey, I'd like to do a degree in whatever. And Waterloo and other institutions don't really have a clear pathway, for those students to be able to gain admissions. And so that's, again, another thing that, we'd like to look at and say, okay, there's been some challenges, significant challenges in the past.
Sure.
And now we need to sort of sit down and take a really good, careful look at how we can solve this.
That's why I think this university, maybe being set aside from a First Nation community, we didn't get engaged as much at the time, but now we've got all that to help us benefit how we can approach this a lot better. I think it kind of gives us a bit of an advantage, because I know in London, the university that we would typically go to had, and I'm just going to be clear, they weren't as truthful to us as we hoped various times. We have intellectual property, that really became a big issue with our First Nation.
Yeah.
Because they did their research and they walked away, just like you said. And where'd that research go, and where our benefit is, So we have a really good advantage now to make that right here, by making sure that we do the right thing with the First Nation communities. And I'm really happy with that part of it, We'll grow, we'll make mistakes, I'm sure, but definitely on the right path for that.
And as long as the community see that, when those mistakes occur, that we're responding to them and we're learning.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I think, they're inevitable, but how responsive is the institution?
And we got to make sure that's a real important part of, that relationship. Mm-hmm. So other things happening in your world. I know we're talking about the university, but I hear you like fishing and doing hunting and do stuff like that too.
It's been a kind of a tough slog this year. I mean, I love fishing. I mean, that is my go-to thing. So where I go is I go to the Mississauga River, up around the Blind River.
Yeah, I know
area.
where that is. Yeah.
And so I've got my spot.
Okay.
Nobody else goes to that spot. It's my spot. And I will go up to a couple places. So I go to this one lake up on Mississauga First Nation, and I like to go pike fishing in May. And usually around July or August, I'll, head to the Mississauga River and then, go bass and a little bit of walleye fishing. And hunting, my son and I, and this is going to be, I have to figure this out. He's my hunting buddy.
Okay.
He's a sergeant in the Canadian Army. He just graduated this past year, but he's full-time now in the Canadian Forces, and he's now deployed in Latvia. And he's the guy I go out with. And so, we just finished doing a grouse hunt.
Okay.
Around the Petawawa area just a couple of months ago. Mm-hmm. And my daughter, I love to brag about my kids. I mean, she's
not a problem.
Third-year psychology student here at UW, and she's also in the Naval Reserves. So the military thing just keeps going. And I guess in the next couple of weeks, what I'm really looking forward to is just downtime.
Good. Yeah.
And so I've got basically my daughter and my mother. It's just the three of us. We're going to be celebrating Christmas just on our own, very quiet, very tranquil, which is okay because everybody else in the family just seems to be dispersed.
Okay.
So, and then, personally, when I'm here in Southern Ontario, my family will say this, I'm a very different person. I'm really uptight, very focused, and people just see me as stern. And then when I get up north, when I go back home, and home is two places. One, Temiskaming, and then one thing I didn't say about my dad's life is that they left community. When my dad was a kid and my grandfather decided he was going to go work in a mine in Northern Ontario, in the north, Lake Huron area, the North Shore, and my dad grew up in the bush. And his bushcraft was second to none, and so he taught me a lot, about living in the bush. And so when I go back, whether it's Temiskaming or the Blind River area, I'm at my happiest. And so I'm calm, I'm happy, and sincerely, when I retire in the next few years, and I've said this to my family, I'm gone.
Okay, yeah.
I'm getting out of Southern Ontario. I'm getting a cabin. I'm getting a couple of dogs.
There you go, yeah.
And that is going to be the rest of my life.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice to have a nice plan like that. You do all your work, and do the best you can, but you think about the time when you balance it all out with. And that's what we need to do, I think, in life, to make it fulfilling.
And it may sound cliche, but I do really want to just be out on the land. I want to be in the bush.
Mm-hmm.
And so, spending the rest of my days hunting and fishing and looking after, some forest, that would make me incredibly happy.
Yeah.
As well as looking back on a career at the University of Waterloo and seeing that I did something fulfilling.
Absolutely. And it's really nice you can look at yourself that way, because it's not just you looking at it, it's your children and grandchildren, to see, because you're creating a path for people, that they can find. You work hard, but then you balance it out with the life that you want to do.
Yeah.
You work up to that, right? Because most people got to work till they're old, because they got to pay all those bills, but, there's another way, and if we model that, people can kind of find that. So I hope that's what happens, and it sounds like it's happening with you. So that's really good. You're looking at that, and pretty proud of your family and your military family. From your uncles and father and you, and then your children.
Yeah,
because that's when people. Well, that's one area where we're lacking. We have an Eagle staff here at the university, right, and it really should be carried by a veteran. And so in our reserve, like our veterans are getting pretty up there in age, and who's going to be the next generation of those carriers of those very honorary staffs, that we carry. So.
Yeah. I mean, for the folks that are listening, I was telling Myeengun before this that, a cousin sent to me a Toronto Star article from 1944. And there's a picture of my grandmother, Annie Lewis, and all of my uncles, so my father and all of my uncles, 5, 6, people together. And the reason why they were featured in that article is because all of the male members of my family basically signed up to go to World War II. Mm-hmm. And it was just, here's this, family from Northern Ontario, that suddenly decide to enlist and fight for the crown.
Wow, yeah. But for a while, we couldn't even do that. We'd have to give up our status to join the military. So,
yep.
It just, our history just keeps going on. These stories keep coming. We're just not what people see. We're a huge part of this country, and our history talks about that. So I think that's why people are kind of drawing toward our people now. They want to know what parents didn't know. And now we're influencing health, with our traditional medicines. We're influencing education now, and I think this is really nice. Like I said, we got more work to do, but the interest is there. And I kind of think going back to BC, where the children were found at the residential school, kind of opened up the conscience of Canada.
Yeah.
What did we not know, and why don't we know those things? So I look at that period, of residential school children being found at these sites. If there's nothing good about it at all, but at least it does open the conscience of Canada. Mm-hmm. How come we weren't aware of these things? Why weren't we aware of treaties? And if we honored those treaties and the life of those children, I think our future could be a lot stronger, because we'd live up to those agreements that we made.
I would agree. Definitely would agree. And I remember Jean's words back a few years ago when when the discovery was first made, and she basically said, this is just a start. There's a lot of, knowledge and understanding of basically the legacy of the past that, settler society needs to basically grow and acquire. So we're at the very beginning, of a very long, I was asked this the other day, and I couldn't believe I got this in writing, when somebody was asking about, specifically the Land of Knowledge project. Mm-hmm. It's just like, when do we get to the point where we've actually achieved reconciliation? And I'm like, okay.
Right.
Yeah. It's like there is no end point.
That's right.
This is a long relationship.
Yep.
And this is something that's going to take a very long time with no clear endpoint.
Yep. It's not a we hit that mark, okay, we're reconciled now.
We're done.
It's never going to be that way. But, that project, is just a legacy project that's going to be part of that process. And it brings in other partners like hospitals and other people. So it does not just First Nations advantage, but the university. And it creates more, partnerships and friendships that we need to form anyway. So that's what I like about it. So, that's why I'm kind of hanging in there too. I just want to get this one going. I was hoping to have it at least going before Gene retired, but, processes take place and it'll still be here, and we'll all work on it together. So that's really good about it.
We'll get there. Yep.
So any final comments from you? It was a nice conversation. I didn't know you as much as I do today now. So I'm really happy that we were able to chat and share some visions together.
No, this is good. This was a good way to get me out of my office, so I'm not just sort of hunkered over a computer, just clocking away. It's good to get out and talk for a change. So thank you, Myeengun.
You're welcome, and it's been a pleasure working with you. And we got some more work to do together, but I'm happy to do whatever I can to assist anything that we can do here.
Absolutely.
So with that said, thanks, John, for being a part of our Nish Vibe show today. And I want to give special thanks to our technician today. Sarmed came in and didn't know about this stuff and learned real quick and became an expert at the technician part of Nish Vibe. So, and I really appreciate we're stronger now because what you've helped us learn about the technicians and part of it. So thanks so much for that. And to our listeners, miigwech everybody. I hope.